Today, I will be breaking down the last video that I made. It took around a week and was a lot easier than it might seem. All it takes is some patience and access to Photoshop and Premiere Pro. I start by taking the original footage and adding some color to it so I can see it better. The lighting wasn't the best, so I had to bump up the whites and highlights. The next step involves isolating the background so we can have that as its own layer. Take a screenshot of the first frame and bring it into Photoshop. Use the lasso tool to select around the subject. Edit, generative fill, and use the prompt remove. Photoshop will do its best job to remove the subject. It doesn't have to match exactly, it's just a lot easier than doing it on your own with no guide. Once you've found one that works, merge the layers. Then we want to turn off visibility for that layer for now and add a new layer. Use the bucket tool to fill the layer all white. Now turn back on the visibility for the reference layer and change the opacity to something like 70%. With the white layer selected, use the brush to draw the background as best as you can. Then fill in the background with whatever colors you want. Once you're finished, export it and bring it into Premiere. I like to add a paper texture to the background of my animations to make it look a bit more realistic. I bring the texture into the timeline and change the blend mode to multiply so the background is visible. I then lower the opacity so it's a bit more subtle. Nest these layers and add a background blur effect to blur it a little. The reason for this is once we add the subject into the clip, it will add a layer of separation from the subject and the background. Now that we have our background done, the next thing we want to do is lower the frame rate on our subject. To do this, I add the posterized time effect and change the frame rate to 16. Now there will be much less frames to animate. However, if you want an incredibly smooth animation, you can leave it how it is. Likewise, if you want less frames, you can lower it to 12. Anything lower than that just looks too choppy. I screenshot the first frame and bring it into Photoshop. Same as before, I add a white layer and lower the opacity of the reference photo. Then I draw over the subject. You can either do this really neat or really messy. It looks cool either way, to be honest, but I usually do a neat kind of look. Once you're finished drawing, paint in the subject, and make sure you save the colors you use. It will make it a lot easier in the long run. Then use the quick selection tool to hit Select Subject. Photoshop will do its best to select the subject, but it usually gets stuff wrong. So you'll have to zoom into the corners and fix little errors so that only the subject is selected. To remove bits of the selection, use the Option key. Once you're finished, hit Command-J to mask the selection. Then delete the original layer. Now export the layer and make sure you select Format PNG, also ensuring transparency is selected. Then bring that layer back into Premiere. Now we are going to set up the subject's shadow. Put the animated frame on top of the reference clip and then nest both layers. Duplicate the nested layer and name the top to Subject and the bottom to Subject Shadow. Open the subject layer and move the frame we just animated onto the reference clip. To get the subject's shadow, I add 3 effects to the layer. First, a horizontal flip, then the tint effect, changing the white to black, and finally adding the background blur effect. I also lower the opacity to 80. Now rotate and move the layer so that it aligns with the subject. Because we nested both clips, we can now hit the subject layer and continue to add the frames into the timeline. This will automatically add them to the subject shadow clip, essentially doing the work for you. Halfway through animating this video, I actually realized I wanted to change the background to a more dark and moody feel. For this video, there are 6 different sections, so I just repeated this process for all 6 shots. I shot this video at an artist called Mez's home studio. He had all these monitors in the background, so I wanted to add some visuals to them. To do this, I just add the Ultra Key effect to key the green out. I then bring in some color static that I found on YouTube, making sure to match the frame rate of the original clip. I then add an adjustment layer and use the Lumetri color effect to color grade, as well as an unsharp mask effect. Finally, adding a camera wobble effect for some subtle movement. This part is optional, but I like to add some blur to the animation to make it a bit more believable. To do this, I bring the clip into After Effects and use the pixel motion blur effect. Not only does it make the animation more realistic by adding blur, it also adds more frames to the video. making it much smoother. Thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel. Have a great day.